Hi folks, HR Funk here, with a handgun review that I have been waiting to bring you for a long time, ever since back around the first of the year when I found out the Military Armament Corporation was going to be building a reproduction of the famous MEUSOC M45 pistol. I have been waiting very impatiently for them to start producing them and actually get them into this country. And now, through the courtesy of SDS Arms, I have one for this review. And I want to say a special thank you to Jared from SDS for sending me the MEUSOC pistol. Without his assistance, this video would not be possible. And in this video, I'm going to be conducting a close-up shop review of the Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol. I'll be telling you a little bit about the history and development of the M45 pistols in general, and in part 2, we'll head off to the range and see how this pistol performs. Now, I know some of you don't like it when I break up the review into a shop review and a separate range report, but I've got a lot of things going on right now and my time is at an absolute premium, so I'm going to have to do it this way just out of necessity, not really because I want to do it this way. In any case, let's get right into it and start this discussion of the Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol. Here we go. We'll start our up-close look at the Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol with the way you bring it home from the store, which is in the box. And in this case, the box consists of a plastic hard case that has latches in the front, and it can also be secured on either side with a lock if you wish to do so. Opening the case, we find the Military Armament Corporation includes a cloth with their logo. Not entirely sure what that's for, maybe a cleaning cloth, but there is one in there. There is the MEUSOC pistol itself. It comes with two 8-round magazines. I'll talk about these a little later on. There is a disassembly tool, and I'll reposition the camera slightly to show you the other items that come in the box. There is some cleaning gear here. There is a federally mandated lock, and back behind this cover, you can also see the operator's manual tucked back inside. Here is our first up-close look at the Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol, and if you're not familiar with the term MEUSOC, it stands for Marine Expeditionary Unit, Special Operations Capable. These are some of the most highly trained, highly advanced Marines in the entire Corps, and really some of the best warfighters in the United States. And as such, they have some latitude when it comes to selecting the equipment they use, and they exercise that latitude beginning back in the mid-1980s by having handguns very similar to this one built just for their use. And here is a look at the port side of the Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC M45 clone. And I think from this point forward, I'm just going to say M45 or M45 clone, because continually saying Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol is already starting to wear on me. But this is also a good time to tell you that the M45 and I have a little bit of shared history. Now, it's just a little bit, and that is we both started our service with the United States Marine Corps in 1985, albeit by slightly different routes. The story of the M45 is one that I can only describe as being very Marine Corps. And that is because it's a story of a handgun that came about as a result of a necessity, and it's something I don't think could have happened really in any other branch of the U.S. military, because as a lot of you will recall, in 1985, the U.S. military officially adopted the Beretta 9mm 92 SBF as the M9 pistol. And there were a lot of Marines back in the day, myself being one of them, who were not really crazy about trading the time-honored 1911 in 45 ACP for the brand new, untested, Italian-made 9mm semi-auto. And to a degree, you have to understand the United States Marine Corps. I worked with senior NCOs and officers who were still angry that 20 years prior to that, they had had to turn in their M14 for the then new M16. These guys were still upset. The United States Marine Corps is really not crazy about changing things, especially when it comes to changing things that their life may depend on. And the idea of trading the time-honored 45 for the brand new 9mm was something that did not set well with a lot of Marines. Now, as I said, the MEUSOC Marines were in a position where they had the ability to decide, at least to a degree, what type of equipment they used. And I would love to know the inside story on this. And any of you who really know it, now I don't mean that you heard your mother's hairdresser tell a story about, but somebody, if you actually know how this happened, I would love to know the inside story. I got a feeling it involved various bottles changing hands and maybe some old favors being called in, but the MEUSOC Marines managed to enlist the aid of armorers at Marine Corps Base Quantico who were in the precision weapons shop. And these were the same armorers who built the M40A1 rifles for Marine Corps snipers. And what MEUSOC asked the armorers to do was to take the standard 1911A1 that was in service at the time and rebuild it with modern components to make it applicable for modern warfare. And the armorers started out with those basic 1911 A1 pistols, and I'm very familiar with those because I was issued one almost every day I was in the Marine Corps as a military policeman. But I was never issued an M45. In fact, at the time, I'm not sure I even knew they existed. I'm going to use my Tizosh U.S. Army pistol to show you some of the differences between the standard 1911 and the M45 as we go. But essentially, the armorers started out by stripping down a standard 1911 A1 to the frame. They got rid of the slide, they got rid of the barrel, they got rid of all the small parts. They started out with just the frame, they deburred it, they made sure that everything was still within spec. Now keep in mind, these frames would have been made back during the 1940s because all the 1911s we had back in the day were World War II era manufacture. And from those frames, they rebuilt these pistols with premium components that I'll tell you about as we go. There are a couple of points I want to make before I get too far into this discussion. First off, the changes made to the basic handgun by the armorers were so extensive that the Marine Corps redesignated these handguns as the M45. So they were no longer the 1911 A1, they were the M45. Also, there were several generations of the M45. I think there were 3 or 4. And not every generation used exactly the same parts. The armorers essentially sourced what they could when they needed to during the initial builds and the rebuilds. The Military Armament Corporation version of this handgun basically is a clone of the original M45 from the mid-1980s. So as I talk about the various parts, they are going to be the parts that would have been used on the first M45 pistols. They did change somewhat in later generations. I'm going to deviate just a little bit from my typical top-down sequence when I conduct a handgun review because the first component that I want to talk about that was used in the M45 is the slide. On the original GI 1911 pistols, there was a heat treating issue associated with the slide, and because of the extensive use that the M45 was put to, and I heard that pre-deployment these handguns cycled about 5,000 rounds and some of them were upwards of 80,000 rounds before they come back for a rebuild. The original 1911 was not really intended to cycle that volume of ammunition. And while the slide was perfectly fine for somebody like me to use every day, they would occasionally crack if they were subjected to extensive use because of that heat treating issue. For that reason, the armorers, when they rebuilt the M45, sourced slides initially from Colt, and these were called hard slides. They were national match slides, as I understand it, and you can spot them because they have the vertical cocking serrations at the rear of the slide only. So if you see angled cocking serrations or if you see cocking serrations at the rear and front, that is not a first generation M45. But as you can see, the Military Armament Corporation version does have the vertical slide serrations that would have been consistent with the Colt slides that were used in those initial pistols. One of the big upgrades in terms of shootability with those initial M45 pistols involved the sights. The rear sight, as I understand it, was actually built by the armorers at Quantico and fit into the dovetail of the Colt slide. And when you look at the reproduction, you can see it has a much wider and deeper rear notch than the GI sight. And I think the Tizosh sight might be a little bit more generous than the actual GI 1911s that were built back during World War II. Shifting our focus to the front sight, we also see a much more highly visible front sight on the M45. This is a serrated front sight that you can see here, and these were staked on millet sights on the original M45 as opposed to the half moon sight that we see on the GI style pistol next to it. So as I said, in terms of shootability, right off the bat, we're getting a much more effective sight picture with the M45 than would have been possible with the GI issue 1911A1. Those Colt slides in the initial M45s also featured a lowered but not a flared ejection port. And you can see in the Military Armament Corporation version, there is the exact same design. The ejection port is lowered, but there is no flare in this trailing surface of the slide. The barrels used, at least initially in the M45 pistols, were Barstow match barrels, and I can't find anything that states conclusively that a match bushing was also used, but I have to believe if there was a match barrel fitted to these pistols, there was also a match bushing. The Military Armament Corporation pistol also features a match crown that you can see here. The hammer on the M45 was replaced with a commander-style ring hammer, such as the one you see here, which at least theoretically reduces lock time and increases accuracy. The thumb safety on the M45 pistol is an ambidextrous unit, and it was initially sourced from King's Gun Works. The version that is used on the Military Armament Corporation pistol I kind of like because a lot of times with ambi safeties, when I disengage it, it impedes my ability to reach the trigger with my trigger finger, and this one does not do that. So I like this design. I'm not sure if this is an exact copy of the King's Gun Works version or not, but in any case, it works very well. The grip safety was upgraded to a beaver tail style that you can see here. I believe these were originally sourced from Wilson Combat, and true to those original pistols, there is no so-called memory bump at the bottom of the grip safety there, and this was really not intended for the very popular thumbs forward grip that is used nowadays. This was still intended for the thumb over thumb grip that was taught back when I was in the Marine Corps. This gives a very positive disengagement, as you can see, on the grip safety. If you go to a thumbs forward grip, and particularly if you have your shooting hand thumb over top of the thumb safety, sometimes you will not get a positive disengagement of the grip safety. In fact, as I'm doing that right there, as hard as I'm trying to disengage that grip safety, I'm not there. I finally got it. But if I use that traditional grip just like that, it's going to be disengaged every time. The top surface of the slide stop is nicely checkered, as you see there, to give good traction to your thumb if you're using that to release the slide. I think Military Armament Corporation did a nice job with that, and I just wanted to be sure to point it out. The magazine release is not extended, but it too is nicely checkered, which once again gives good traction to your thumb when you are releasing the magazine. As I understand it, there were a couple of different triggers used early on. Initially, there was a steel trigger with an over travel stop that was welded in place so it could not be adjusted. Later, that was switched to a Wiedecke 3-hole lightened trigger to prevent the possibility of bump fires with that heavier trigger. As you can see, the one used by Military Armament Corporation is faithful to the Wiedecke version, and I'm glad because I actually prefer that one. The face of the trigger is serrated, as you see there, and also it has a functional over travel stop. When it comes to the trigger of the Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol, What can I say? It's a 1911 trigger. It breaks very, very cleanly. There might be just a touch of over travel, but I could adjust that with the screw if I decide that I want to. I would say this is breaking probably between 4.5 and 5 pounds, but I am going to break out my Lyman trigger pull gauge and we'll find out precisely where that trigger is breaking. Here we go with the trigger pull test of the Mac MEUSOC pistol. Let's find out exactly where this trigger is breaking. First pull, 5 pounds, 6.3 ounces, a little bit heavier than I thought it was going to be. This is a brand new unfired pistol, so this will likely get a little bit lighter as time goes by. Second pull, 5.5 pounds. And the final pull. And I think I overpulled that one. I got 6 pounds, 2.4 ounces. That gives us a 3-pull average of 5 pounds, 11 ounces. And I think that last pull skewed things a little bit. I think it's actually right around 5.5 pounds. But with the break of this handgun, for anyone who's ever fired a 1911, you know that it really doesn't feel that heavy. It definitely does not feel like a 6-pound trigger. I was estimating it between 4.5 and 5 pounds because that's what it feels like. The M45 pistols also used a flat mainspring housing with a lanyard loop similar to the one you see here. This one is nicely checkered, but this is also something where I wish they would have stuck with the original arched mainspring housing as seen on the 1911A1, because when it comes to that grip safety, I think the arched mainspring housing actually sort of guides your hand into that grip safety to help disengage it, and it reduces the possibility of having that issue that I talked about a little while ago, where if you're using a grip with your thumb over top of the thumb safety, you don't get a positive disengagement of the grip safety. So I'm one of the people who likes the arch mainspring housing. Some people very much do not, but that's one place where I wish they would have stuck with traditional 1911 parts rather than going with the flat housing that was used on the M45. The M45 also used the Pachmayr wraparound grips, just like the ones that you see here. If you go back and look at photos of the original M45s, you will see them with this type of grip. And between that and the checkered mainspring housing, it feels like I get a really good grasp on this pistol. Unless the armorers beveled the magazine well, similar to this, the original M45s would not have had this, because I remember specifically on my 1911 A1 pistols, we did not have a beveled magazine well. So the armorers could have done this. I don't know if this is original to the M45 or if this is just an upgrade added by Military Armament Corporation. In either case, this pistol does have that beveled magazine well. The original M45 used Wilson Combat 8-round magazines. The ones that come with the Military Armament Corporation version are 8-round magazines. These are not marked with any maker. I think these are Mekgar magazines, but I'm not sure, and we'll see how they work when we get out to the range. The Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol features a black QPQ finish, which is resistant to wear as well as rust and corrosion. The Mac MEUSOC pistols are covered by a 1-year warranty as well as a lifetime service contract. They have an MSRP of $774.99, and if you've ever looked at any other reproductions of the M45 pistols, you'll know that is a pretty darn good price. I've got to say, I really like this pistol. I like it for its heritage. It is derived from a handgun that was made by Marines, for Marines. It has a lot of the very modern touches that you would expect on a 1911 style pistol, without some of the things that are of limited value to many carriers. And I'm talking about equipment rails, I'm talking about optics mounts. This is just a good, basic, fighting pistol, and probably the only thing that I'm ever going to do to it is maybe add a little bit of color to the front sight just to make it easier for my eyes to pick up, but otherwise I'm going to leave this exactly the way it is, and this is probably going to become a carry 1911 for me because I like it so much. And that's going to do it for the close-up look at the Military Armament Corporation MEUSOC pistol. As I said back at the beginning of the video, in part 2, we're going to head off to the range and see how it performs. Until then, if you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by my website, hrfunk.com, check out the news and information page to see all the latest things going on with me and the channel, and go by the products page because a lot of the products that I've reviewed have links on that page, and there's information beneath some of those links that'll save you some money if you decide to make a purchase. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.